diplomatic visit. Thank you, Laura.
Hi, I'm really excited to be here. Thank you all for coming. I love a captive audience to talk about my research. I'm really excited. Yes, so this is my paper. So what my entire paper was about was the 1953 diplomatic visit to the United States by King Paul and Queen Frederica of Greece. At the time, this was the longest and most geographically varied tour of the United States by any foreign dignitary ever. And this was in 1953. And so I kind of stumbled across this doing research for something else, and I was like, well, why? What made this happen? It just seems so anomalous. And it's hard to imagine now something of that scale happening here in the United States and being so highly publicized. So, and what I wind up talking about is how this visit, I think, is the perfect vignette to display these things that I really am interested in: public diplomacy, statecraft, Greek cultural heritage and Greek identity, and also American foreign policy and the Cold War. So let's just set the scene a little bit. This was a huge deal. Like, it was a massively publicized event. Every single step on this tour, which lasted from October 27th, 1953 to December 30th, they were in the United States. And everywhere they went, they were hailed and greeted with parades, and it was just crazy. And they were trying to seem American. They were doing American things, like visiting rural areas, learning about American manufacturing. They took pictures with Chryslers, they went to a baseball game and ate banana splits. Like, they were trying to sort of seem American. They went and sang White Christmas with Bing Crosby, so weird. And even when this trip was announced in the summer of 1953, I included this letter because I read through all of this correspondence between a lot of mayors and the State Department who really wanted their city to be on this itinerary. They wanted to be on it. And this exchange is really funny. The mayor, I talk all about it in my paper, but the mayor is asking the State Department for Toledo to be included, and then once Toledo is included, the mayor's like, okay, can I also come to a dinner in DC? So there's a lot of posturing and a lot of social stratifying that even happens within the American sort of aristocracy when this happens. So it's important to say, here's what's going on in Greece that makes me think, okay, I understand a little bit more about how we got here. So obviously, Greece had been inhabited by the Axis powers during World War II. They were just not in a good state economically. And then in 1949, the Greek Civil War had just ended, which was the Northern communists against the Greek government. So it was just they were not in a good economic or political situation. And up until this point in 1953, the US had been financially supporting Greece since 1947 with the Truman Doctrine. And I talk about in my paper how I think this is also an interesting moment for American foreign policy, because it had been sort of isolationist up until this point, and at this point, the US was sort of trying to say, okay, we have an identity that's outside of, just being part of the Allies, that's not just Anglo-American. So the US was financially supporting Greece at this point, and I think that they wanted to make it clear that they were sort of an international patron, right? So that's what's happening economically. But politically, and this is an important note, the monarchy in Greece was a very tenuous institution. They were not a widely legitimized or respected institution in Greece, but it's pretty different abroad and in the American media. Okay, so the US, and I think this is really key. In the summer before this visit, Eisenhower had created a psychological strategy board, and this was a response to a similar program that the Kremlin was and had, and at this point, the US was sort of trying to say, okay, we have an identity that's outside of, just being part of the Allies, that's not just Anglo-American. So the US was financially supporting Greece at this point, and I think that they wanted to make it clear that they were sort of an international patron, right? So that's what's happening economically. But politically, and this is an important note, the monarchy in Greece was a very tenuous institution. They were not like a widely legitimized or respected institution in Greece, but it's pretty different abroad and in the American media. Okay, so the US, and I think this is really key. In the summer before this visit, Eisenhower had created a psychological strategy board, and this was a response to a similar program that the Kremlin was running, and it was meant to just exploit US weaknesses. And the US was highly aware that in the sort of PR campaign of the Cold War at this time, the Soviet Union seemed a lot more kind to small countries, and especially to the countries around the Iron Curtain. And the US was very aware that they were still sort of associated with colonialism. And I argue in my paper, what better opportunity than, let's invite Greece to the US, make it clear that we're supporting these small countries, right? And this is really important for just the ideology and the rhetoric that's espoused on this visit. So there's a lot of this sort of passing the gauntlet style language. And I argue that Greece is the perfect country for this kind of like diplomatic peace offensive, just because of the position that it holds in our minds. Like, despite the fact that Periclean Athens, which is like what we think of when we think of Greece, is such a small sliver of their history, it's like it's still just omnipotent in our minds, and it's just like that status is unshakable. And Greece, as this sort of like cradle of democracy and humanism and art and culture, is like the perfect mouthpiece for these cold, like anti-communist rhetorics, right? And they have just a lot of credibility on the international stage, even though like the Greek Civil War was highly publicized. So I talk about that, and I sort of think about that in my paper, like, okay, what effect does it have that Greece has this like omnipresent cultural heritage in our minds, and how does that impact their diplomacy and also, this visit to the US? So there's a lot of rhetoric about, Greece once stood for all of these things that America holds dear, but now America is going to carry that forward. And that's a big part of this visit. And so that's that. Then something really weird happens. This isn't that important to my argument, but I just think this is really interesting. So right after this visit, the summer after, the Greek king and queen bring together 100 of European aristocrats on this mega yacht called the Agamemnon, and they sail around the Aegean Islands. And the way that this is branded is this sort of post-World War II blue-blooded reunion, and they want to be at the helm of it, right? And what's also crazy about this is that King Paul, it was his secret hope that there would be several royal betrothals to come out of this, and there were just none. And it was something that he kind of couldn't answer for a long time. But I talk about this in comparison with this whole tour of the US. How are they concerned with branding themselves? And I think they wanted to be, clearly associated with the Allies, associated with America as, power post-war sort of recoalescing. And America had emerged as like the richest and most powerful country to come out of that. But they also want to be European monarchs. And this picture too, this is a stamp. I just was so struck by how much it looks like a British stamp, right? But yeah, I'm fascinated with this moment in the sense that I think that the king and queen, they wanted to legitimize themselves, and they wanted to legitimize Greece. And they were using America to do so. They wanted protection, and they wanted just diplomatic favor, and they were, in a position where they had the world's attention by going to the US. And I think the US also knew that this was an important part of their PR campaign. And I am just fascinated by the sort of torch passing moment that this also was in rhetoric. And it's just a really rich moment in our history. And I think it should be remembered as an important early Cold War moment, at least. So, thank you.